which is in
So
Clackamas
if anybody
County.
wanted one, I've got
Right
one
into
for
Russian
them.
River,
Okay.
Multnomah County.
That close.
So I ran across a big book on lampreys online that I downloaded. Yeah, and it has all the species of the world. And it looked like there was maybe 4 in Oregon and probably 2 right here.
There's actually 3 right here,
3?
interestingly enough.
Okay, one of them barely makes it in or something.
Well, you know, there's kind of some taxonomic debate, but there's
Yeah.
a small local lower Willamette river lamprey or brook lamprey species that has been separately, you know, defined in the literature. So technically, there's 3 right here.
Yeah.
Hagfish, does that fall as a lamprey or not?
What?
Hagfish, does that qualify as a lamprey or not?
No, it's a whole different family of fishes. Lampreys, yeah.
Doctor's offices.
They
They don't occur in fresh water either, for that matter. But,
Okay.
they even
It is
gave the location of the type species for all the.
Should we go ahead and get started?
It was either Willamette Falls or up by Estacada for the 2 that were named here.
Okay, it's 7 o'clock. Call this meeting to order.
Good deal.
Roll call. Pete, you want to do it?
Yep. All right. This is the NRC meeting for February 11th, 2015. Jerry Herman,
Present.
Ginger Redlinger,
Present.
Brian Boyce,
Present.
Douglas DeHart,
present.
Doug Neely,
Here.
and Richard Craven. Here. Richard is on remote.
Shaw Spady.
We also have Tony Conkle, our Community Development Director, and Dan Holliday, our Mayor, and I'm Pete Walter, staff.
All right. First item on the agenda is interviews. And
All right.
we have 3.
Let's see, we have reapplicants, Richard Craven and Brian Boyce. Shaw Spady had applied, but she withdrew her application.
Oh, okay.
So we're still going to have a vacancy. And I'll leave this up to the mayor to kick off.
Actually, the way I've done this in the past, I've let the committee do the interview, and if I have additional questions, I'll ask those, but I'm really here as an observer.
All right.
Good.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. Well, let's go in order on the agenda. So we will start with Byron.
Brian.
Brian,
Should
why
I
do I
just
say
go
that?
out there
Yes.
so I can-
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah,
Thanks,
sure.
everybody.
Just make sure your mic's on, Brian. Thanks.
Yeah.
Would you please start, Jerry, with the first question, and then we'll just go down and take
We don't
turns.
have questions, do we? Oh, you have questions. Is that what this
Oh,
is?
yeah.
Oh, okay. Ryan, why are you applying for the position on the Natural Resource Committee?
Well, as you all know, I'm reapplying to continue the position that I've held previously. I'm, widely active in environmental, let's get work done sort of stuff. The Clackamas River Basin Council, and a little bit with the Greater Oregon City. Attended their last meeting anyway. And worked with other groups in the past. And I'm basically just wanting to continue at this point.
Okay, I'll take question number 2. Not only for us, but it's good for everyone. We'd like our mayor to hear more about your background as well. So please tell us about your background in natural resources.
Okay. I first started working with natural resources-oriented groups a good 30 years ago with the Wetlands Conservancy over in Tualatin. I've been involved, including chairing the board for the Clackamas River Basin Council for a dozen years. I've been chair several of those years. I'm not currently chair. I'm getting too busy, so.
Thank you.
Okay.
And I have a background in originally horticulture, landscape design, and nursery work, and learned native plants quite a while ago, and was active with the Native Plant Society for a while, until I started up another business and, again, got real busy. So, but I am writing a book at the moment that's related to that subject, combining the ornamental horticulture and ecology. So, and that's something that's ongoing at the moment.
Thank you. Doug, will you ask questions?
Sure. I take it we can sort of restate these questions
Sure.
so they're appropriate to the applicant. Obviously, Brian, you have served on an appointed advisory committee. So given that you have done that on the Natural Resource Committee, what would you say is the most rewarding part of serving in that position, and what's been the most frustrating?
Well, you know, getting stuff done on the ground is the most rewarding thing, you know, where you're actually accomplishing things. And sometimes the amount of work you have to go through to get anywhere with that is the least rewarding part of it. But, you know, so it's two different aspects of the same thing.
Would you ask the fourth question?
What do you think the emphasis should be from your standpoint of the Natural Resource Committee in terms of what it should be doing?
Of what we should be undertaking, or?
That's right.
Okay. Well, you know, basically we need to advise the city on natural resource issues, that they're approached properly and fully, and be able to do that as appropriate as things come up with the city, and also work with other bodies that are with whom we overlap. You know, one of the big ones being the parks, and but also to some extent a number of other city agencies. And so there, I don't think there's a one thing out there. That's, you know, part of the problem with this group is that it is a big charge that it has, and getting to everything may be an issue, especially as, you know, things like city code comes up for consideration and so on in the future. That'll be another big thing.
Could you elaborate a little bit about what you mean by that? I mean, that was a very general statement, so when
Well,
you say,
we know that the city's going to approach its code in general, not just natural resources, but and we know that we should be putting in our 2 cents worth when that does happen as far as natural resource issues go. And you know, we don't have any plans other than take a look when we get a chance, and get up to snuff through presentations to us of what's there now.
what is your definition of a natural resource issue?
Well, that's a good one. It's something having to do with the natural environment around us, water, wetlands, but habitat in general, and as far as especially natural resource overlay areas and parks and areas controlled by public works that have natural features to them, like retention basins and so on. And there's more limited commentary that could, that could be associated with other sorts of development. Like, are we going to encourage street trees or not? And our plantings in general to get the urban canopy up, which is a goal of a lot of cities right now, to at least increase the amount of trees that are present. That would be an example. Much highly developed land doesn't have a lot of things that we need to deal with, because it's already developed, and it's up to the landowner to decide what they want to do for the most part. But often many cities encourage the planting of street trees, for instance, and Oregon City has to some degree done that, and So when that part of the code is being addressed and by the city in general, then it may be opportune for us to say something at that point, point out what other cities have done and what is possible and not possible in that situation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Other questions from the committee?
I have a question, I guess. My question I was going to pose to you was, how would you address a challenge or an issue that you felt strongly about or had knowledge about that was a challenge to a natural resource issue? What would your approach to solving that dilemma if there's a challenge that you feel needs to be resolved? What steps would you take as an advisory committee member?
The first thing is to, find out what's really there, what's really going on, and if there's any way of approaching that other than just saying, hey, would it be better to do so and so? It's going to depend on the situation, but you need to get the facts out and what's really going on there and what could be done or should be done, depending on city code and how it addresses that, whatever that issue is, and getting city code, to the point where it can address issues as appropriate is one part, but then when something comes up, then that's another issue that has to be addressed at that moment since it's come up.
Okay. Any other questions?
I have one. Brian, recognizing you have a lot of experience with this committee, you've served as its chair, all of that, you understand the committee's issues as well as anyone. The committee is in the discouraging position to not even be able to recruit enough candidates to fill its own membership at this point. How would you react to that? What do you think is wrong, and what should we do about it?
That's a good one because we're almost there now. We thought we were actually a full committee up until a couple of days ago, and at this moment in time, I think another shot of publicity out there may do it because we're really only short one person at this point. And but we just need to make a good case that this is a place where someone can help out and maybe make a little bit of an impact, by helping with their expertise or whatever skills or interests they have.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Now we're going to switch over and interview Richard. Richard, can you hear us?
Yeah, it's kind of, I can hear you fine.
Good.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Now, I don't know if you have the questions in front of you. Or,
No, he doesn't.
No,
Okay.
I haven't seen the questions.
all right. Well, then we'll surprise you. We'll take turns asking you the questions. And we know that you've done this before, so we'll modify the questions a bit to make them fit. But we're going to go at the same order.
Richard, this is Jerry Herman. I'm wondering why you stayed in Oklahoma than be here tonight
Why I stayed in Oklahoma?
instead of coming here
70
tonight.
degree weather, family, and other issues.
All right. I'm trying to rattle you here, but the real question I guess I had is you've been a part of this from the founding level of the Natural Resource Committee and have been appointed in the past. Why would you want to be involved in this again? What are the things that make you feel good about this enough to want to do this again?
Well, I live in Oregon City. I've lived in Oregon for 45 years. And I'm obviously interested in natural resource issues because I was in the environmental consulting business for nearly 40 years. And, of course, my background is in fish and wildlife and threatened and endangered species and so forth. I was on the original committee, as you mentioned. I think I know a lot about Oregon City, and I think I know a little bit about helping to try to identify issues and provide options for resolution of issues.
Thank you.
All right, Richard, this is Ginger, and I'm going to ask about your background, but what I would like you to talk about is in the context of the things that we've discussed, the larger picture of as far as why this work is important in the Natural Resources Committee. Promoting the value of what's in Oregon City, letting people know what's available, how many opportunities they have to do things in their neighborhoods and the river and the parks related to the beauty that's in Oregon City, and to promote stewardship of those same natural resources. So within the context of the value and the stewardship, what is your background along those lines? What have you done? Why do you value those things?
I'm not sure I exactly understand your question.
Me either. I kind of rattled.
Formulated in a little
I
different
apologize.
manner.
It was a poorly worded question. Tell us about your background, why you think, what have you done in the past that's led you to continue your work on the Natural Resources Committee as we try to promote local stewardship of resources?
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, basically, I don't see any disastrous conditions in Oregon City in terms of the environment being turned upside down. I see relatively minor things, some more major than others, I suppose, but I don't see any really bad issues that are in Oregon City in terms of natural resources. In terms of the stewardship part of it, I think that, you know, through our communication with our neighborhood groups, that we can provide some information to them to help them in decisions that they might make in the neighborhood in terms of natural resources, promoting planting of trees where they're not trees now and they should be, because the street trees have been cut down because the sidewalks have been devastated by one thing or another. Taking care of water quality facilities and those private water quality facilities in neighborhoods that the city doesn't maintain, and just getting involved with the city in terms of natural resource efforts, whether on this committee or as a volunteer. And I think that the city would benefit by having a volunteer coordinator or somebody with that title or that responsibility to help gather up volunteers.
All right. Thank you. Doug, do you want to ask the next question? 3?
It's done. Dick, you have served on this committee probably longer than anyone else here, and understand the committee and its history perfectly well. So what would you say are the most rewarding things you've done while serving on this committee, and what have been the most frustrating?
Well, I guess going back to my comment on environmental conditions in Oregon City, I think the most rewarding thing to me is that I don't see any huge bad problems, facing Oregon City. I see lots of issues that we can all work on, but it's rewarding to me to know that there's nothing sitting there that's like, a disaster on some natural resource. And, I think the tree ordinance effort, it took a long time, it seemed like, but I thought that was really a good effort, and I thought there were a lot of good discussions on that. And I learned things that I guess I didn't know or think about. So although it was a long effort and it seemed like it was never going to end, I think that was a good effort. Most depressing to me is that we as a committee sometimes can't seem to get our focus. And we seem to be at odds, frankly, with the City of Oregon City staff on some issues. And I think it's kind of a matter of developing the rapport and the communication and recognizing what our responsibilities are. And our responsibilities are not to tell departments or the city what they should be doing. It's to make a recommendation on what they could do. And so, to me, I think it's been a very frustrating experience from that point of view, you know, just trying to get and maintain our focus and then get our point across to the city. But when the city doesn't accept our recommendation, we shouldn't, I believe, get upset about it. We might take another approach and understand why the city wouldn't accept our recommendation. But, you know, there's always two sides to every issue and every story on things, and I sometimes don't think the city hears us, and I don't think we hear the city.
Thank you, Jerry.
Apparently, Richard, you don't see any burning environmental issues, but do you see things that can be improved upon that that we could be looking at, both in terms of discussions with city staff and the city commission, the issues that might improve certain things?
Well, I think that, you know, we recommend. We don't really make decisions, and I think that we need to understand a little better, I believe, what the city's facing on certain issues, because we might come up with a recommendation that is just totally in left field. But we may not know that unless there's communication back from the city staff to tell us that, well, that's a good idea, but here's some problems with it. And so I believe that, you know, more open communication. We need to develop a rapport, you know, with the city. And I don't think we've really done that, but I think we can do that.
Okay.
If I might follow just with another question. Right now we're staffed by the planning department. Do you believe that there's perhaps a better entity to work with in these issues?
I kind of heard part of that. It sounded like you were asking if there's a better something to work with.
A better department that we would function perhaps better with. Obviously, there are issues when code is developed for planning purposes and so forth that we might give suggestions on. But I'm thinking at a broader standpoint, what departments you think would be the most appropriate for working with in terms, particularly of current conditions?
You know, I'm really not sure about that. I've heard, I believe Jerry and others talk about maybe a different department, Public Works perhaps. But basically, you know, it gets down to a mindset and how the city views our group, and to determine, you know, just where we should be. And I think the city probably needs a little more of an environmental focus somewhere, and some kind of an environmental coordinator, perhaps, within the city, to you know, to serve as our liaison. I think Pete's doing a fine job from the planning part and so forth, but I don't think that's really, you know, what his job description is necessarily in terms of being a land use planner and so forth. I think that maybe if there was kind of I would call it an environmental coordinator of some kind of a person with a broad-based background in environmental sciences that can deal with a lot of different issues, whether it's fish or wildlife or forestry related or permits or whatever. Somebody very broad based that can develop a rapport with the department. And, you know, if no matter what department we're in, if we can't develop the rapport, you know, we're going to fail, from my point of view. And so I think we somehow need to develop the rapport, and the departments need to develop the rapport with us. You know, it's a two-way street. If we're not, if we're not a valuable group, the way we are to the departments, then we don't need to be, we don't need to exist, frankly. And so, from my point of view, we recommend things, and we work at the direction of the city. If the city wants us to work on something, we work on it.
So this is the mayor. What do you consider as the core mission of the Natural Resources Committee?
Well, basically, as I mentioned, we kind of make recommendations, and I guess it's kind of two-pronged. One is that the city has certain things that they want us to do, and therefore we perform that task as requested, whether it's review of the comprehensive plan, or review of various applications for environmental issues, or whatever it might be. But the second part of it, from my point of view, is that we need to bring, I don't want to call them issues, but need to bring ideas to the city on how they can improve either discussions or rapport with outside groups, or issues that need to be addressed by the city based on what the NRC thinks.
Thank you.
And I think that's where we sometimes get crosswise with staff at the city, bringing up issues that are sometimes not well thought out, maybe. But that's because I don't think we've developed that rapport, and I don't think we have the joint meetings or the discussions. And, I've got in addition to the environmental sciences background, I've got a lot of experience in mediation. And, I can sit in some of the meetings and realize that this is not going right. And, I see it on both sides. And so I think, part of our problem is to develop the trust and the rapport, and to each of us understanding our roles in the process. That's probably more than you wanted to hear.
Thank you.
Any other questions from committee members? All right. Well, we are done with that portion then. We'll move on to the next item.
Public comments, but seeing there are no public in the audience.
Let me just pose a question. Do you think, in terms of the two interviewees that we've had, we would want to make a recommendation to the mayor?
We should make a recommendation regarding the slate to the mayor, I believe, to do what he feels to advance the slate.
Okay.
I would make a motion that we advance the two candidates to consideration of appointment at the city's discretion.
I second the motion.
There's been a motion and a second to move the two candidates, Brian Boyce and Richard Craven, to the city for appointment to the Natural Resources Committee, or reappointment as the case may be. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion. All those in favor indicate.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, the motion passes.
Before we leave the subject, if you don't mind, Shaw indicated to me that she'd be fine if I mentioned what her reasoning was for withdrawing. Her reasoning, she told me, for withdrawing had to do with feeling that the code amending process is difficult. I'm sure that's a true statement. That doesn't mean it can't be amended. We know how that can be done. And she felt that a lot of the issues on this environmental slate that we work on are going to require code adjustments, and she wasn't feeling comfortable in committing that time to it. So, yeah.
Thank you.
But she certainly enjoys this group and working with the city. So,
All right.
The chair would yield for a minute. Because I've been up since 4:30 this morning, and I obviously by my dress I didn't have time to change. So I'm listening to all of this stuff, and Tony's got some things to say, but all of these committees are being looked at by the City Commission, and we're trying to give some focus to each of these committees so that we're getting some good feedback and that we're not wasting your time. So I'm hoping that you guys can work with Tony and figure out, what it is that you want to do in some more focused manner, because you can't have, can't be doing land use applications and, reviewing developments and looking at the code, and, that there's too much stuff going on for a committee this size. So we're hoping to find some focus and some direction. And that's all I have to say. But I do apologize, but I did want to be here for the interviews, but I'm gonna take off and go home now.
we thank you for being our liaison. Is that true? You're a liaison?
I appointed myself as a liaison for the foreseeable future until we figure out what these things are going to look like.
We appreciate your helping us.
Doug, you had a question?
Yeah, I was just, there had been some indication, I think, either at goal setting or afterwards, that you might want to have a study session specifically for a natural resource. Is that an intent?
I believe that's the case.
Okay.
And I would have to talk to David or whoever about, when that might come up.
The request I was going to make, I think this committee had outlined some goals, and they may have been in your packet, but I would like when you make the decision, I'd like to be enough out there so that we as a group can have some discussions about how we would want to prioritize some of our notions in code before we go into that study session.
Okay. So,
Sounds good.
you can make that happen, right, Tony?
Sometime you'd like to have a discussion amongst yourselves.
Yeah,
about
ahead of
what the
time.
code should look like before
Right.
we have a work session with city.
Right. Just to bring me up to date if no other reason.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thought maybe you were pulling ivy or clearing trails or improving our.
We all look like
Parks.
that. We like looking like that, don't we?
Yes, we do.
We do.
Yes. Okay. All right. Approval of the minutes.
Need to back up, sorry. Jumping around. Okay, these are the minutes for the October 8th, 2014 meeting, which was not in the chambers. It was held in the room behind the City Commission chambers. So it's an audio recording, and the transcription is from audio. There's no video associated with this one. Can you all see that attachment?
Draft minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't read that.
Yes. Okay, we're reviewing the minutes now.
Hey, Pete, is the video running now?
It should be running on the city website, yes.
Okay.
And these were the last minutes, the ones from October, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm. So, normally, if you look at your minutes before the meeting, we should just breeze through this stuff. But I understand if you need to.
Yeah, I wasn't able to get this online, so,
Okay.
yeah. All right, I've reviewed them and they look good. I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we adopt the October 8 minutes as written.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
I'll abstain.
Okay.
One abstention.
right.
Move.
Thanks, guys.
Motion passes. Okay. Skipping the public comments since we have no one present. Old business?
You know, Madam Chair, before we go to that, the previous rough agenda I had a category called agenda analysis, which was where I think Pete would ask us if there's something we wanted to add to the old or new business section. I would like to see that
Yeah.
be a part of this each time.
Yep.
Because the old business things that are on here, these are things in which I told you about, but there's some new ones I've put on here too. So under old business, I'm just trying, there was a letter of support that was supposed to be written in behalf of the Metro South Wetland Gateway Project for our organization, if you recall, advancing the NRC's endorsement of that project. And nobody wrote that. I thought they would, but I have a draft here, which I'm willing to circulate, one thing.
Okay.
Then the heritage tour that I was planning for March is impossible to get done by March, and I'd like to move it to May, when the weather would be better, specifically perhaps May 1st or 2nd.
Normally, this stuff would be on your NRC member report section of the agenda, Jerry.
Oh, can we do that?
You can do that.
All right, do it that way?
Yeah.
Okay, the only reason I mentioned the letter of support was that was old business. We agreed to do that.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so these other two things I will not talk about then. And then under new business, I see your tree protection code discussion, but I'm wondering what happened to our Arbor Week effort.
Yeah.
You'd like us to be involved in something, and I'm not sure I know what that is, but we want to
Okay.
be involved in helping you.
All right, well, I can bring you up to date on that.
Okay, so those are the only two adjustments I felt.
Okay.
Okay?
So Arbor Week will move, report will go into communication members report, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so old business on the agenda is the role of NRC department. Is that,
That's kind of what you've been talking about. So maybe, Tony, you
Maybe
want to
Tony
chime
can-
in on
yeah.
this one?
Yeah, I think Mayor Holliday kind of summarized really where we're at with that, is, you know, having discussions with Pete about the best way to take the work that you guys have accomplished with your goals and the bylaws, and then how do we incorporate and codify that into a review of the existing Natural Resources Committee language in the code. And so we're going to take a first swipe at that, essentially, and then we were trying to figure out how do we time this, right? How much work do we want to put in, have you put in, before we go to the city commission in a work session and get their input, you know, but we've got to get something down on paper to start with. So I think that's what the objective is here, is to get something down, you know, hear, you know, larger concerns. Let's not get wrapped around wordsmithing, but the larger direction, the larger issues, if there are any, so that then we can go to a work session with the city commission, have that discussion, receive their input, and then we can come back and clean that up. And really, you know, have you guys focus on the big picture policy, and we'll deal with the wordsmithing, you know, trying to be consistent with, you know, and we talked about this a little bit last time, is we've got some committees, some councils, some commissions, some are codified, some are not, some are by resolution, and so we're just trying to get everything consistently, and trying to be consistent in how we appoint people, how we nominate. I mean, some of the basic nuts and bolts, but then getting into the specifics of those duties and trying to really focus in on what those should be. So that would be the proposal. So really, it's an update of what we talked about last time with, you know, like I said, trying to figure out how do we get something started so we can have a worthwhile discussion with the commission, city commission, to hear their thoughts and concerns, but not just walk in there with a blank slate. So at least have something that we've vetted with you, you're comfortable with, we can go to them, see what they have to say, and then we'll clean it up and hopefully get it adopted.
Are we thinking like this is a 60-day, 90-day timeline?
It's hard because you guys are once a month, work sessions are once a month. I think it's just going to be if we can, because their work session was last night, right? So I'm kind of a month delay. Once we get through this committee, I've got a month before I can get on the work session because of how those just fall on the calendar. So we would propose to be bringing something back at the next meeting. So depending on how that goes, we could be at the April work session. But if I got to come back again, then we're into the May work session for the City Commission. So it just depends on how efficient we are with our work and our comments, and how comfortable we are if you have comments at our next meeting of us just incorporating those and then taking them to the work session, or if we have to bring it back to go through that process again. So we'll see how it goes.
One of the things that I've been thinking about is natural resources, and the ones that come to mind are soil, water, and air. And in terms of infrastructure, dealing with water issues, and I've alluded to this before, Public Works might be an appropriate place, but as has been pointed out, we overlap in various areas as well. And I guess if we have some kind of discussion of what made sense in terms of who we would best work with.
And I think some of that's going to come down to, what do you think your goals are?
Yeah.
What are your roles and responsibilities? Is it dealing more with public infrastructure projects? Is it the fact of the matter is, we don't open up the code very often. We don't write comp plan very often. So I think we've had that discussion of I don't do capital projects, right? And so that's where I think kind of trying to figure out what that role, what that responsibility, what the objective is, may help facilitate that conversation.
I've heard you say the goals and so forth. We spent 6 months fooling around with goals and refining from 14 down to 5 major areas, and then a work plan that represents what we could do within those 5 major areas. I think we have a lot more focus than we used to have. Now, we can certainly reduce our focus to even or more refined viewpoint, but I really think we made huge, headway. So is that the direction you'd be coming from? Is recognizing that and trying to tidy it up even more, or?
Right. I agree. I think that quite a bit of effort has gone into that, and trying to kind of really focus in on what we think we can accomplish. And so, but when you compare that to with what the Chapter 2 ordinance says, it's so broad.
That is true.
Right. So can we marry up kind of this more refined goals and our goals and bylaws here to that legislation?
Okay.
Right. So I think it's a good start. I agree. I think it's a very good start, and I appreciate the hard work that went into kind of saying, okay, what should we be focusing on? So can we get the code language now to reflect kind of that refined vision, rather than this, very, very broad and rather non-descript description that's in the code right now.
I can't even remember what the ordinance says, but you're right, the ordinance is very broad.
It's hard to find something that doesn't fit.
We didn't change the ordinance because we can't change the ordinance without city involvement. But you made a comment just now about capital improvement projects. Can you tell me what a capital improvement project is? This is a technical question I'm asking. What's a capital improvement project?
Is it 90/90 road improvements? So it's the public works or public ODOT going in and spending capital dollars in infrastructure improvements.
I'm really glad you said this, because the state of Oregon, in one particular group I work with, is thinking it's everything that's non-public, and that's not true. In other words, I don't think
sector?
that is private sector does capital projects, and for the good of the public are some blank other unknown name. They've got this wrong, I think. I just want
how we refer to them, it would be the public funding would be a capital project.
Yeah. Okay. Glad you said that. Okay. Thank you. Just another sidebar there.
This is operational in the budget. You have capital, you have expenditures, you have operational expenditures.
Doug DeHart.
Let me get at a question I think Jerry just asked, frankly, but in a somewhat different way. And Pete, perhaps you can help us. Tony, perhaps you can. The committee spent much of last year trying to address this issue of our direction, our focus, our goals. We largely completed that in the first half of last year. And just as an aside comment from me, to my knowledge, we got no assignments or requests from the city for work or input during the last year. So basically what we did was these products in the early part of the year. What's the status of those, in particular the bylaws revisions? I've heard 2 or 3 times dates they were going to go to the City Council, and I'm holding here a draft, which I presume means there's not been any action since we last dealt with this in the first half of last year. So what's happening? I mean, where are we?
So
My question.
with the election, we have a new mayor and 2 new council members. Historically, not a lot of direction was given to the committees on what did the city commission need to get accomplished. So we kind of had, we set our own agenda essentially. When Mayor Holliday came in, there was a request to look at that and to try to provide some more direction to these committees that serve as an instrumentality of the city. And so ideally, you know, the enabling ordinance would be written in such a way that committees don't need bylaws. But because they're all written so differently and there's no structure to them, some have bylaws, some don't have bylaws. Some have extensive bylaws. Some have bylaws that just deal with what do you do in these weird situations when someone's not present for multiple days in a row, you know. So they're all over the board. So we've been asked to try to standardize that. And not to say that there won't be a need for bylaws, but we're hoping that it'll be much less. And that the purpose, the direction will be in that enabling ordinance rather than in committees writing bylaws trying to decipher what the city commission meant for them to do. It really should be.
What's the answer to my question? And this document I got in my hand that we worked on the first half of last year, waste of time, it goes on the shelf, you're going to use it as some basis to do something else, or there's something entirely different in the works? What's happening?
I think that that'll be incorporated into some of the code language.
In other words, this isn't going anywhere, and we don't know yet what the process will be. Is that where we're at?
We're going to write code that clarifies the roles and responsibilities of the Natural Resource Committee. And we're going to try to standardize that across the multiple committees that we have throughout the city.
And because of the new administration and this desire to standardize, that effort is just getting started. You're explaining.
Correct. So,
and this is really past history now, other than to the degree there might be things in it that would be usable. Is that right?
I think that the things that are useful, and there's probably things that are in there that are in other committees that are codified.
Yes.
Right? So we're going to take that and codify it. So I think that it's a good base document to work off of. And then once we've got it codified, there may be parts of those bylaws that we still need to adopt as bylaws because we don't want to codify it, or it's a unique situation. And so until we dive into that process, I don't have an answer for you whether it's 25%, 50%. So yes, you're right. I don't exactly have the complete adoption process.
It's a process underway.
It is, yeah, but it's intended to work with the Natural Resources Committee to come up and look at and vet it so that we can have that intelligent conversation with the City Commission and then hopefully move forward. Because I think we're, you know, like I said, I appreciate the work that has come to kind of try to focus this, which I think is the intent of what I'm hearing from the city commissioners, So now how do we just codify that
Right.
and then move forward?
In light of
Doug
the
Neely?
motion.
I don't think the intent is not on my part to throw all this work out. It's a lot of good work.
Wonderful.
Okay, Neely?
This was the reason that I asked that we have one of our meetings prior to the study session devoted to looking at some of these issues, so we can have that dialogue with staff prior to going to the study session. This might help set the, I don't know if you call it an agenda for the study session, but enable the things we think that are important to be discussed at that level. And my understanding, there would be a study session that's somewhat devoted to the natural resources.
Right.
So I don't think that's no progress, actually. I think there is progress there. I mean, you haven't had that opportunity with the previous commission, and you do with this one.
Yeah.
And I think the real issue is that ordinance that you talk about, that legal language that defines what we were supposed to do. It's still not quite right, and we did fool around with that. So,
And I think Richard Craven was correct in his one of his answers where he talked about the importance of establishing rapport and good communications through the process. So I think we'll have the opportunity, and we have something to work with, and we'll have a work session in advance to get ready for that, and I think we'll be ready.
If it takes three, I mean, I'm not married to one meeting or two. I mean, our goal is to get it right.
Right. Okay.
and I guess following on Doug's thinking, Doug Neely, the discussion about possibly another department or whatever, what we're doing in those goals still applies broadly enough. One or two things where we work on code, potentially work on code, if asked, I think that's how the language goes, might not have anything to do with us if we were a part of, say, Public Works. But still, going through this process is not a bad thing, is it? No. Okay.
And I see, much like, I think we're slowly doing a better job of trying to touch each of these committees when we have larger citywide public investments or programs or initiatives going on. So, whether this is under community development or it's under Public Works or wherever it does fall, if we're doing code amendments, we fully intend to bring those back here, right?
We could still participate.
Right, exactly. It's just trying to figure out where's the best place to house it.
I
Neely?
mean, planning is very much involved in working those codes out, but everybody's involved in the process. Whenever there's a codes change, it's a citywide discussion.
Yeah. Okay. All right, next item, new business.
Well, under old business still, I have this letter.
Oh,
Can I
are we
pass the
gonna-
letter around
I thought we
and
were
it-
going to do that during the member.
I don't know, it's just an action item, and do we do action items, I was just asking.
Yeah, well, maybe we should do that under old business.
Whatever,
Yeah.
it's an old business carryover, so we'll pass
Yeah,
around.
okay.
And you can look at it.
Yeah, let's go ahead
It's
and
just
talk
a
about that
draft.
now.
If you don't like it,
This was in one of our previous meetings?
It was
Well,
January meeting.
Yeah, January
Yeah,
meeting. We
Matthew,
talked about
my assistant came and
right, he
spoke to
came
that.
and he spoke, and we said we were going to draft a
Right.
letter of support for
Right.
him to use in his work, so this is a copy of that letter for us to review.
Right. And I wasn't even quite sure of the mailing address, but
And I believe we voted we had a motion and we approved
Yeah, I
to
did
go ahead
not
and give him
vote.
the
I
letter,
did
so we
not,
don't need to
yeah.
vote again on this item.
okay. So there's a example, I don't have one for you, Pete, I don't think, I'm sorry, but I can give you one.
Okay.
I can give one to Pete there. And by the way, it looks like it's advancing in the process. Okay.
Okay, good, good. When is the decision?
Pass this one down to Pete. I don't need it.
Do you know when the Metro will make a decision on this?
They'll make a decision in the next month,
Okay.
but it would be nice to get something like this from us, again, was my reason for doing it.
I think it
Asking
sounds
you
good.
folks to do
Yeah.
it.
Do you want a blessing on it, essentially?
Well, at the last meeting, you all voted, I
Right.
abstained.
Right.
So if you think this is good, or if you might want to change it, if
Yes.
Ginger wants to wordsmith it, or whatever.
No, I think it's a good letter.
I think it's fine.
I like it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Matthew
We
wrote it.
should fill in the blanks, though.
Yes.
Or contact a representative blank at blank. So.
Well, I'm going to say Matthew Rigg. Then he's my young assistant, and he's a lot better at the computer than I am. Guarantee. And I can get that number. I can call Pete back with the information that fill in those blanks, including the exact address to where it's to be sent.
Okay.
I'll do that. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Nice letter. Did you write that letter?
No, Matthew wrote that. That was his assignment.
That's very good. Okay.
Well, that explains why it's
Oh, okay. All right.
That's why you like it.
Well done, Matthew. All right. All right. Next item, new business.
Okay. I have prepared a very short PowerPoint for this, so bear with me. Okay. So you should be able to see on your monitor, if you flip that silver switch, what I am looking at.
This one?
You had it, yeah.
And
Oh, where is it? Where's that from?
all right. So I've got 11 slides. This will be fairly short. Room for questions. The Oregon City Municipal Code section that deals with tree protection during development review is section 1741. This is part of Title 17, which is the zoning chapter. This code section does not regulate trees in the public right-of-way. That is a separate section of code, which you guys have looked at during your heritage tree review. That's 12.08. It also doesn't regulate trees in the natural resources overlay district, although there is some overlap. That is regulated under section 1749. This code section applies during development review when a land use application is submitted to the city for either splitting a parcel of land into a partition or a subdivision, which is 3 or more lots, or a commercial or industrial or institutional property that's going through site plan and design review. So in the code, this is straight out of the code, this is the applicability section. So the ones I just mentioned is under section 1. It also applies during public capital improvement projects, in which are reviewed as a type 2 process now. And also it applies when there is tree canopy removal greater than 25% on sites with greater than a 25% slope, unless those sites are exempted. And it also applies to a designated heritage tree or grove. And how does it work? Well, typically for development review, the code outlines 4 options which can be used, either by themselves or in combination. The first option is the most typical, and that is the use of complete to partial removal of trees and subsequent mitigation by replanting, with the saved or replanted and trees protected by a covenant or other form once they've been replanted. The second 2 options are incentives to be flexible with respect to development standards such as lot sizes and setbacks and things like that in order to preserve existing trees. One is through the use of a dedicated tract in a subdivision or partition, and the other is through the use of a restrictive covenant, which is just a deed restriction on a private property rather than a tract. Options 2 and 3 have not, to my knowledge, been used yet, even though they're in the code as an option. Option 4 is fee in lieu of planting, where the price or cost of each tree that is required to be replanted is paid into a tree mitigation fund for use citywide. And that option and option 1 have been the typical options that developers have chosen. So the combinations of these above are permitted. And I'll,
Peter, questions appropriate along the way? Or hold it
sure,
to the end?
go ahead. And I do have some examples so we can show you what we're talking about.
Two quick ones then.
Yeah.
The first one is about restrictive covenants for replanted or protected trees. What's the long-term side of that if the replanted or protected trees die or have to be removed for safety purposes?
The covenant language has a provision for removal of a dead or hazardous tree. So it does allow for removal and replacement if an arborist report is submitted, like the code works. And that has been used in some cases when a property owner doesn't have room to, well, we've used covenants for the public tree code. And rather than the tree being planted in the planter strip because of insufficient space, at the owner's discretion, they can record a covenant against their property and plant a bigger tree within their yard boundary in the front yard. So it's a similar type of mechanism.
On this one, after implementing this, we do have some concerns on the implementation side as well as the equity side of this. Oregon City does not have a tree code. As a private property owner, if you want to cut down a tree or 2 trees or all of your trees, you are allowed to do that. So we've continued to kind of nibble away at this without actually addressing the larger issue. And the CC&Rs are a civil issue. The city does not enforce CC&Rs. So there are legitimate concerns of why are we requiring private property owners to record these CC&Rs of which we are not the enforcer of. It's a civil matter. And wouldn't it be better to protect the tree through the land use process, through the building permit process, and then, you know, if you build a brand new home and they've protected 5 trees on the property through that process, is the homeowner really going to come in and cut down those 5 trees? Maybe, most likely not. But then, you know, as standards have gotten more rigorous, we were actually just had a large delay on a development because this county surveyor was requiring that each tree be surveyed with meets and bounds, which is completely unacceptable. So, you know, because of our lack of desire to address tree canopy, tree preservation, tree cutting on a citywide, fair and equitable manner, we kind of pick and choose. So we have this mishmash of new homes over the last 4 years who have these CC&Rs and whatnot. And so it just brings into question, did we kind of swing a little too far, and maybe we need to rethink this a little bit. So, you know, that is certainly something we've ran into as we've tried to implement this.
Frankly, there's no other city that does private tree covenants that I've been able to research on the web anywhere. So
They don't do what again?
record private covenants against private property for protection of trees. They either have a complete comprehensive tree ordinance, or they don't require a covenant. They just leave it up to the owner to manage their own trees on their own property, with that exception for environmental overlays and steep slopes.
When you start to weigh the mitigation trees that are required, the landscaping requirements that are on top of that associated with new homes, plus your street tree requirements, we do run into situations where you can't realistically fit mitigation trees within the development. And so, like I said, I think it's, you know, it was a legitimate concern that we were trying to address. We thought this may work. But really, I think it's been shown to kind of, it does raise equity issues as well as just the ability to actually enforce it.
Does that mean then that in the long term you think there's merit in a comprehensive tree code like the one Tiger just adopted or something of that?
I think it's I think there's probably there are pluses and minuses to that. I don't know if this community, how this community would truly feel. We've never asked that question. I know a lot of energy would need to go into the education and eventually trying to codify some type of a citywide private property tree permit system. In just the staffing alone of that, we don't have an arborist. We don't have a, so who's responsible for the urban canopy? Is it Pete and I? Is one of the other things we just pick up, or should it be something, if we're truly investing in, then we need an urban forester who looks at this comprehensively and can really address these issues. I mean, that's just my opinion. It's that's a big project, right? To not only write the code and implement it, but just the public education, the outreach, the negotiations that are going to occur. And frankly, folks don't want their trees regulated on private property. Right?
Questions, I guess. But you have these mitigation things in the code.
Yeah, I was going to
Yes.
go into that a little.
Okay, then
Yeah.
I'll just wait.
Okay.
That's what I mean. So when you start thinking about all the advancements we've made, because I'll admit, when we started here, 13 years ago, there wasn't anything, right? So we've come a long way with multiple steps in 2002, 2004, 2008, 2010, and we keep making improvements to that system. And this is one where I think we may have missed a little.
Okay, so I was going to give you an example using the current code. This is a aerial photograph of just north of Thayer Road, new subdivision called Merriweather, and the area that's shown as a red rectangle to the right of that is a new subdivision called Douglas Grove, which is recently approved through a Type 2 land use process. You can see from the aerial photograph there's canopy of some fairly large trees on there. What you're seeing to the immediate left of that are public right-of-way, street stubs, and alleys, which the developer is going to connect to with the plan. So I'll show you the plan. This is a broader overview of what's going to happen there. And you can see they're planning to stub those streets through. They're actually going to be putting another street on the east side of that development as a half-street improvement between Catalpa Way and Thayer Road. But I'm going to zoom in on this on the close-up. So the top three lots, this shows where the street would be stubbed through. The trees that are inventoried are all the trees that are 6 inches diameter breast height, required to be inventoried and shown on the plan in relation to the future lots and the street rights of way. So the developer's showing us on this portion of the plan which trees they're going to remove and which trees they're hoping to preserve, and the diameters of those trees. They've also shown some clusters here. And we're not really sure what they meant by that, so we conditioned the application to tell us what these clusters actually mean. Are they 6 inches DBH below breast height or 6 inches DBH above? So anyway, based on this inventory, they are planning in their preliminary plan to remove 32 trees from the entire site, and they're going to have to come up with a mitigation amount based on our code as a final condition of approval. The area that I showed on the upper cloud, it's sort of a cloud with a green outline. They're proposing to preserve those trees in the backyards of those lots. So that's unique. If they had decided that mass grading this site was going to be difficult. If those trees were to remain, they could have chosen to remove them, and the amount of mitigation trees that they're required to plant would be much higher in that case, because those are in the backyard of the future homes. So,
It's pretty flat terrain, it looked like.
yeah, and it's flat, essentially flat.
Can you go back a couple slides?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me if I'm wrong. I believe this is the area where Tony Marnelli had his land to be cleared. Okay. And we had quite a little ruckus over that, as I recall. And I understand I think I understand what you had to do. You had to allow them to, you folks had to allow them to clear they had the provision to clear the land. They were allowed to do that. Is that applying to this red area too? Or did you come up with a new scenario now, new method?
No, it's the same standard.
But they've
Yeah.
chosen not to clear the land quite as extensively here, and that's what this framed area.
Correct. They're saying that they think that they can practically preserve some trees in the backyards of the future lots.
Yeah,
Now,
Yeah, I remember the whole
oftentimes
issue, even
that's
age
their
standard.
preliminary proposal. When
Yeah,
we
okay.
can condition the final approval, they are required to do a final construction plan and show us exactly what can be preserved
Right.
and what cannot be preserved when they do a final plat review. So,
Well, I remember the
But, yeah.
difficulty that was, everyone was faced on that whole thing. This looks like a little more creative
And,
method. The other thing was, I think Tony was talking a little while ago about some lots don't allow you to do mitigation planning. Near the high school, there are such real close townhouses. I don't know where you put the trees.
yeah, and this is zoned R35, so these
And-
are 3,500 square foot lots, actually slightly larger, yeah.
And being creative people as you are, I'm sure you probably have ways to get that density somewhere else in lieu of when the loss occurs, putting that density somewhere else. Is that true? Mitigating elsewhere. That's my question.
The trees,
If you have to.
locating them somewhere else?
Yeah, because you hardly even have room for street trees.
Right. What we
Yeah.
typically see is fee and lieu right now, and then we try to identify spots throughout the city
Okay.
to plant or larger specimen trees to be planted.
Okay, good, thank you.
So there's a very prescribed process for how they calculate the number of replacement trees. As I said, they count all the trees on the site. Then they document the condition and size of them. They document any trees that are currently diseased or hazardous. They're allowed to subtract the number of diseased or hazardous trees from the overall count. The remaining number is the number of healthy trees on the site, and then they would define the construction area. Then they determine the number of and diameter of trees to be removed both within the construction area and outside of the construction area, i.e. the setbacks where they could potentially save them. Then, based on the size of those trees, they look at the table in the code, which is this one, and they either follow column 1 for trees removed outside the construction area or column 2 for trees removed within the construction area. And you'll see that the ratios on column 1 are much higher than the ratios in column 2.
Meaning they have to mitigate more trees.
Mitigate more trees, yeah.
Do you have a setback plan on any of the pictures?
Well,
So-
we don't
so
have a
what-
replanting plan yet.
So when
Yeah.
Pete's, so blue blossom away,
Yeah,
that's what we consider inside the construction area. The road has to go there, it's in the right of way. Behind the sidewalk, so that's a 54-foot right of way, that's our typical local street, 32 feet of pavement, 5-foot planter, 5-foot sidewalks on each side, 1-foot utility behind it. But then behind that, you typically have a 5-foot easement. That's where you're gonna put Comcast, natural gas, your utilities so that they're undergrounded. So that's part of the construction area. So now your 54-foot right-of-way became a 64-foot right-of-way. The R 3.5 zone allows your front yard setback to be 5 foot in the front yard, 10 foot in the back. What are we on the sides? 5 and 7, 5 and 5?
5 and 5.
5 and 5. So anywhere within that circle, so +5, +5, so that whole is where the house can be built. So that's part of the construction area. So any trees in one of those areas get mitigated at that lower factor. But let's say that little green area that they preserve those trees, that's outside of the setbacks, right? So that's the rear yard open space area. So if they wanted to take those out, those are examples of trees that would be mitigated at a higher rate because they're not in a construction area. Theoretically, they should be able to be preserved. So that's why the mitigation for those was almost like a carrot stick type of a thing of if you want to take these out, even though there's really no reason to, it's not in a construction area, there's no need to, then you're going to have to mitigate at a higher ratio.
That's good.
For example, that's why like the ones that are X'd in Blue Blossom Way or on lot number 3 right next to the sidewalk, those are X'd. Usually be like, well, why can't you keep those? Well, really, if you're going to be putting your Comcast, your natural gas, your telephone in that easement space right behind the sidewalk. It's hard on these smaller lots.
Yeah. So this is an excerpt from the staff report. It copies what the applicant inventoried on the preliminary plan, and they're following a code, and they're showing what they plan to mitigate for, but they had some unknowns on here, so those were the clusters, and as such, staff conditioned the application to follow through and tell us how many multiple stems are in each of those clusters to determine whether there's a mitigation or not, because they're just avoiding the question in this case. And this is quite common. You can't always nail down the exact number on a preliminary plan. You got to wait till you get the construction plan, which is stamped by the engineer, and then follow through and double check on the final plan. The other aspect of this application, which is very common, is that they are doing a combination of on-site planting and will likely have to do some off-site planting and possibly also fee in lieu as well, just because of the space that's left over to replant. So all of those options are spelled out in detail in Condition of Approval 32, but I'm not going to show you that because it's almost 3/4 of a page long. It just spells out what the applicant can do in terms of those options. Ultimately, they're going to be responsible for a total number of inches of mitigation in tree caliper, and how they follow through on that on the final plat would be, it does it presents an administrative burden on staff to make sure that all of the trees are planted that they said were going to be planted on site, all the off-site trees are going to be planted, that the fee in lieu is properly paid and accounted for into the right funds, and then how we leverage that money in the future is dependent on various aspects too. So,
Is the trend line that is growing or maintaining itself, the fund?
the fund is increasing. We haven't actually leveraged it yet, but we're hoping to do that this year with the start of the Friends of Trees project and in the neighborhood of Barkley Hills neighborhood. And I was going to talk about that a little bit later.
What's been interesting is we haven't seen folks taking advantage of protecting groves and getting reduced setbacks.
Right.
Usually if you wanted to get a smaller setback or a smaller lot size, you'd have to go to the Planning Commission for a variance or an adjustment. We've written it in where we can do that administratively. So if we want to protect a grove of trees and it means our setback is 5 feet instead of the required 10 feet, we can do that. But I don't think to date we've seen anybody take advantage of that. We also have written in, if you protect, we identified certain trees that we consider significant for Oregon, Oregon white oak, for example. So if you were to protect an Oregon white oak, you actually get credit for that to offset other trees that are coming out as some type of an incentive. Or it also gives us the flexibility, like for example here, you got 32 trees taken, you're up over 90 some inches, 90 trees in mitigation for that, with some unknowns still to be worked out. But if you wanted to come in and say, hey, I'm willing to plant, instead of 2-inch caliper trees that are required by the code, I'm willing to plant 6-inch caliper trees. We have the flexibility to work with them. Or, hey, I want to plant white oaks because it's the appropriate spot. So we try to incentivize some of those trees that are representative of this area.
but you said they weren't responding real well, the public at large, the building community?
Well, I don't think we've had one track created with requests for
No.
adjustments.
Almost seems
No.
like that's a category for us to look at as a committee. You know, we give
Yeah.
out plaques for significant trees, don't we? We ask you to help
Well,
us.
then
do
it
that.
really needs to be a market incentive for a
That's what I'm
developer
thinking,
to
you know.
actually want to reduce a lot size 40% in order to preserve a grove. You know,
Yeah.
they're really thinking about market demand for whatever housing product they're ultimately going to build. And, you know, if they've got the option to just clear the property in a certain area and plant mitigation trees, and then they're going to put that down on the balance sheet against the other thing. So,
But it seems like it'd be possible to have an incentive program recognizing your significant people because you're preserving a grove, and groves are important. to
sure,
us.
yeah,
I
I
don't
mean,
know how to do
recognition
that,
would
but-
be a big part of it. Yeah.
Say, Pete,
Yes,
I have a question.
go for it.
Okay. You mentioned fee in lieu. I believe Tony mentioned that a few minutes ago. How many projects or how much money do you collect with fee in lieu to date?
I think it's
Are there a lot of projects fee in lieu, or just a few, or?
well, the amount of fee in lieu is 300 and something per tree, and depending on the project, I think our tree fund is right up around 15,000 right now. So that'll give you some idea, and it's been in place for about 3 or 4 years.
Okay, I guess sometimes developers would like to do the fee in lieu because it's just really a lot simpler typically, and ultimately maybe cheaper long term, kind of depends on the project. But, so you pay the money to the city or the county or the state or whatever the situation might be, but then where does that money go? And how much of it gets back through the ground, on the ground projects? And how is the administrative cost figured in that?
Mm-hmm.
Because if a developer puts in a tree, there's not much administrative cost from the city point of view as compared with the city taking the money in and then administering it and then doing something with it in terms of trees.
Right. Well,
Have
that's
you thought about or have you considered how all that fits together? Or
not in any holistic sense, but our hope is to leverage that money to its fullest extent through partnerships, such as with Friends of Trees, and they get money from grants and that sort of thing. Tony, you want to add in?
Well, I think that the 300, I think it's 320, 330, something like that per
Yeah.
tree is an estimate from Public Works for what it would take to buy the tree, pay to have somebody go out there, dig the hole, plant the tree, and then the maintenance associated with it. So that number isn't just random. It's derived from an estimate from our Public Works Department to provide that service.
Right.
It's that fund started slowly, and many of you know, when you've got a one-time cost coming in, it's hard to set up a dedicated program off of one-time costs because you never know what the next year is going to bring. And so really it was trying to put together enough money to maybe, slowly, find a program that we could start with that, or, we have a mitigation project where we can bring those funds to bear on. But really it's kind of been this slow accumulation of funds to where, it's like, hey, great, we've got 15,000, but it took me 4 years to get there. So really I'm operating on $3,700 a year.
yeah,
Which may change.
Yeah, I guess,
Development's been
my
extremely
question
slow.
originates from the point of view of where do you get where's the biggest bang for the buck occur?
Right.
And I would hate to see money going into the city only to be siphoned off on administrative costs where it could have been put to on the ground projects.
100% of the money, 100% of the money we've collected is in the
Whether
fund
they're
right
getting the
now.
biggest bang for the buck by fee in lieu or having a developer going into it.
Yeah, I mean, we're very sensitive to that, Richard, and for that reason, we haven't expended any of the money yet.
Right.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
All right, let's go ahead, Doug. We need to keep moving, though.
yeah.
I was just going to ask, the mitigation can occur. Can the mitigation occur with interested private property owners with the understanding that those trees, in fact, are in some way going to be protected?
Yeah, and that's where, and that's where I think we got to be thoughtful about this, right? Because I'm taking money from development and to give it to a private, we just got to be careful that there's a program and accountability for how those funds are spent. Or could it go to, the Glen Oak Park wants to create a grove. Can we put money into that to buy some larger trees to help accelerate that grove development? So are there worthy public projects too? So I think everything's on the table. Just when I take private money in for mitigation and give it to private property owners, I just got to be careful how that happens.
All right, final slide is a summary. So what the code attempts to balance is the right to develop land to urban density on zoned land within the UGB per state land use laws, and requirements for clear and objective standards for residential land development, which is also a state law, and also achieving urban forestry and replanting goals through extensive replanting. So we're not there yet, but within the context of land development code, this is, the city's attempt to achieve that. And this code was adopted in 2010, I believe. So 2008 with an update in 2010.
So you've presented this info to us. What would you like us to do with this information?
I would like you to absorb it, ask questions of staff if we haven't been clear on anything, and if the city commission determines that this code is something that needs to be looked at, then we can use this as a basis for suggesting amendments. But for the time
Part of it
being,
too is the educational component of it, because I know one of the more visible things with development is the clearing of land.
Right.
Right, and so the assumption, and I can understand why there are concerns. We have them as well, but being able to have that education, that response of we do have codes in place. It's not just nobody's watching, nobody's implementing anything. We're just letting developers run amok in the city and do whatever they want. Isn't the case, and so that's part of this as well, because there are unfortunately times when you end up with the one on Thayer or down on Glen Oak Road where several hundred trees were removed, right? And there's an immediate knee jerk, understandably so, because whether it's we're not explaining it well enough, or there's a lack of understanding of how this occurs and what the requirements are is part of this process.
I think the rub of the road comes, we wish there was a way to encourage them not to do that, but in reality, they have a right to do it until something changes. And that's not happening. 500 trees at $300 each equals $15,000. Is that what $15,000 means in the tree planting fund?
Yeah.
Okay.
Roughly.
Roughly, yep.
What did you just say?
$15,000 of accrued fund to date after 3 years or whatever. Sounds like at $300 a piece, 500 trees can be planted.
$30 a tree.
300.
45 trees, right?
50
$300.
times 300.
50.
50
45 or
trees.
50.
Oh, I'm sorry.
depending on
Okay.
whether
Yeah,
it's
you're right.
300 or
Sorry, I wasn't
350.
thinking. Yeah, you're absolutely
You know what I
right.
mean?
So
So a lot of trees are being mitigated, planted.
Yes, I was going to say, I mean, actually,
it's not-
relatively few
Small.
trees have been removed and paid into the fund over 4 years.
That's a good point.
10 trees a year or something.
That's a good point.
Not very many.
Right.
That is a good point. Okay. All right. Good. Good report.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
So, next up is member reports and communications from staff.
I had a couple, but I'll let somebody else go first here. I don't want
No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, you'll tell us about Arbor Week.
Yes.
And I would like to see us have a booth there and do something with this committee's involvement. and I happen to have a booth. It's not fancy, but I have a booth that I think would work at the, Eastham location that where you're staging out of?
Right, April 13th is the date.
April 13th. I didn't know what the date was. Okay. So I'd like to see us as a committee, I don't know what it means, take on something to
Great.
distribute information or give out seedlings. I don't know, something. So we have a presence.
Yeah, I was planning to ask nurseries in Canby for seedling donations like we did back in 2010, so hopefully we can
Okay.
get that.
What time to what time?
Details are still being worked out. It would be pretty much a full-day event starting at 9 and going to 2:30 to 3. Be phased because there's different ages of kids that will be involved. We're hoping to have at least 60 big kids, students, participants. It's an in-service day for the school district, so there won't be classes. That was one of the reasons why we chose April 13th. Friends of Trees is going to be helping run and manage the event, and also helping to recruit volunteers and publicize it. What the NRC can do is assist with the publicity. Having a booth there would be great. We'd love to get you more involved into this event. We're still working out some of the details. There will be an opportunity for educational stuff with the smaller kids and the Blue Heron Alternative program at Eastham as well. So Laura Poor is the person that we're working with to help coordinate things on site. And the school district is planning to donate the trees, 25 2-inch caliper trees to be planted around the perimeter of Eastham. Because the ball field there is no longer used, so they're just going to plant trees all around the outside of the ball field there, abutting Malala and what's that street that goes into the site?
Well,
there?
and also there's an atrium there. I don't know what you call it, but it's a courtyard,
Right.
which seems to me it could use some help.
Oh, yes.
And I'm almost suggesting maybe this is out of line, but we could go in there and clean that thing up. And I'm serious. Maybe high pressure wash it, which I've got the way to do that too, and make a little contribution there to the look of the grounds there. Because that atrium area is a very special area to them, but it doesn't look very healthy. I don't know. Just throwing it out there.
That'd be good. Yeah, we want to engage the Berkeley Hills Neighborhood Association to be part of this event as well, because they're the first neighborhood association that we're going to target for a fall planting. And the idea is that starting on Arbor Day, which we will be saying in Oregon City April 13th, we'll be starting the recruitment process for a neighborhood planting in the fall later on. And Friends of Trees likes to have a kickoff event, build momentum for that fall planting, and get willing property owners to sign up starting then all the way through the fall, which would be another event that we'll coordinate. But in that Friends of Trees will continue to manage the planting event in Berkeley Hills. So I would like to send you the details of this once we've hammered the final scope out with the school district and with Friends of Trees. It's pretty much there, but the times are not completely solid yet. The date is, and then we'll work around that.
Well,
Great.
could any members of our committee feel like we need a little subcommittee here?
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
wondering if anybody's willing
Yeah.
to help with something specific to the booth or sprucing up the site. I don't know. Anybody have any thoughts?
I've got a few ideas I could share. I think in regards to helping hand out the seedlings
That
that
would be
will
helpful.
get donated, and teaching the kids how they ought to be planted, because they're bare root and they
Yeah.
need to be planted carefully. I'm not sure if they'll be Douglas fir or evergreen seedlings or what we'll get this year. Haven't heard back from the nurseries. That's one component, but anything you guys can think of in terms of little sidebar activities for the smaller kids and that sort of thing. We want everybody to feel like they're contributing and doing something, even if they're not planting trees. But we're hoping to have I would say we're hoping to have throughout the day at least 120 volunteers show up, whether they're local Oregon City residents, Clackamas Community College kids, students from throughout the community. and adults as well.
That's good.
Yeah.
Do we know these trees are going to get planted? I
Yeah.
remember, well,
Yeah.
the thing is, I remember when we,
Yeah. Okay.
at the Chapin Park, before Mount Pleasant closed, a lot of seedlings were given out to a lot of kids, but
Right.
I don't know
the
that they had any
seedlings.
clue of what they were going to do with them. My guess is most of them get planted.
Yeah. Well.
And
good
so,
question.
and so, if in fact there were areas, be it public work-owned properties or park-owned properties where we know we could have some trees planted, it'd be nice if we could organize some of those kids and go out and work with them.
I agree.
I mean, I think having something there at the site is fine,
Either way.
but if we have the ability to actually go out with a few kids
that'd be good.
and do the
Yep,
plantings,
I agree.
I think that'd be far better.
Right.
And-
I agree
and-
with that. Yeah.
And there's a cultural issue is that it's getting awfully late for bare root plants.
Right.
And if somebody
right.
throws them in the trunk and forgets them for a week, they're good and dead.
Yes, that's
You
right.
know,
Yeah.
they need to be dealt with that
Right.
day,
And
really.
that's what I think probably happens to the trees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good consideration. So
And
we'll
most
need to
nurserymen
think
would have
carefully
planted
about
them by
that.
then,
Yeah.
so.
Well, I'm going to multitask here and say one of the things that I could do is to organize the Rotarians, the Oregon City Rotary,
Good.
to volunteer to help out that day.
That'd be good.
And I just happen to have recruitment tools. We're doing a wine raffle, which is a benefit for the Children's Center and the county health free services. So if anyone's interested in purchasing a ticket, a wine cellar raffle for $20, I happen to have some here, and I will again pass along the word next
Okay.
Wednesday at our meeting about getting them to volunteer.
Yeah.
And maybe
You
the
will get no
quantity.
fiduciary reward for these things that
No,
you're giving out.
none
I can
whatsoever.
tell you that.
None whatsoever. It's just an opportunity.
So the Rotary
Logical
interest?
words is what I want to know.
Well, yeah, I'll talk to them about
Okay,
it.
good.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's a great idea.
Yeah, yeah.
That Rotary Club's got a lot of members. So.
Yes, yes.
So we'll be starting to put together a flyer and a website and various other publicity tools in the next month here. So,
Would you bring those tickets next week too, or is
Yeah.
this?
Well, we're getting.
How far out
we're
is this event?
We're getting down to the wire, so we have another week or two.
Oh,
Yeah.
we've got an event.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's coming up soon, but
so just call me if you want to follow up on these, and I'll help coordinate them. Okay.
Good.
I'll send an email out to everyone asking for subcommittee work.
Yeah, that's fine. I like Doug's idea that the direct planting aid
Right.
would
Oh,
be
yeah.
a big. I think involve a number of my young people in that too.
Hopefully
great.
Gary will be there. Gary
Yeah.
Oak.
Yeah.
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 He'll be there. We asked. Okay.
And then another item, John Ludlow asked me to meet with him about something on the North Spit. And I thought, what are you talking about? I thought it was about concerns about right-of-ways, whatever. He was asking information about what's in the ground and so forth. I thought this has got to do with right-of-way issues. And so I went to see him. Rick Bruin actually asked me to do this. Rick Bruin's the Parks and Rec Director for Clackamas County. And what was going on was there was a movement underway to pull out the cable in the North Spit along the banks. In the past, they were cutting it off, and they're actually being asked to consider the county getting involved in pulling out old cable and
Are we talking about the
debris
cove?
from the North Spit of the cove.
Okay, the call.
All right, and I said, no, you don't want to do that. It's holding the thing together. I really don't think you want to do that. And I think the initiative was coming from the cleanup folks, whose name I just forgot. It's the We Love Clean Rivers group, okay? Because there is a lot of cable and so forth, and it is strangling some trees, that is true. But those trees have grown up through those debris. And I told him, John, I think you really need to, one, talk to the city about this, and two, don't do it without seriously looking at the consequences, because that thing could start collapsing.
I think they have to talk to the city about it. The city owns it.
Yeah.
Right, and he was just being asked to bring something together, and I said, I really think it's not a good idea, and I think that, so I thought I'd report that to you,
Yeah.
okay, because I
That
really
was
don't.
wise to
Yeah.
defer it back to the city.
Right.
That was a good idea.
And then I don't want to keep going here, but I have two more things, so
Oh,
if
just
somebody
go.
else got something,
No, just
okay.
finish yours so
We
that-
have a heritage tour by bus that we have done 2 years ago, and Tony helped pay for that. It was $450 the bus, okay? And this year I proposed doing that in March. It isn't going to be possible to get this done in March. And then there's a river tour that is being sponsored by the city through the tourism tourism team, who allocated some monies that they had helping to support this event, and this is the flyer, excuse me, sorry, Richard, which describes that event. I'm sorry. And this is planned for May 23rd, and this will involve a jet boat, a covered jet boat, and just a nuts and bolt quick look is it's going to be a salmon bake and a departure to Willamette Falls and all the way down to St. John's and back. And you can see the cost in there. That's the cost to cover the expenses of the people on board. It's a covered and heated vessel. This is something we can use during the winter. And the real thing here is we can really see the salmon being caught, I believe, and also see the seals and sea lions trying to catch the salmon from the fishermen. It'll be a really interesting interaction, but it's proclaiming Tom McCall. And the theme is that we're going to have people in character form, two or three people portraying his life, all right? So I was proposing that we as a group do a thematic approach to the bus tour this year, but do it in advance of this, okay? And because this is a costly event, and it's being sponsored by the city's tourism committee allocation in part, but I also have to assess people a fee to do it per person. I'm asking your consideration for doing the heritage tour if we want to do it, which would celebrate the areas of the city that we would like to look at. I'd like to have a few people help me with this. Brian and I did this before. If we still want to do the bus tour, there's a $450 cost. I can't get it any cheaper than that, already checked. That's what Pete and I think, and Tony were able to access a bus. Do a 4-hour bus tour, maybe 3, no more than 4-hour bus tour on Saturday, May 2nd, preceding this event date, as a thought, if you still would like to have that part. If you don't, we don't have to do it. I mean, I'm willing to put the effort into it. I think it's kind of neat to see the sites. The problem we had last time, if there ever was one, was that we tried to include a lot of things and it was timed out very well, and we did accomplish that. I got us into a predicament listening to one developer where I couldn't get the bus turned around, so we won't do that again. Mm-hmm. But so this is an independent thing, the flyer in front of you, but the heritage tour looking at natural resource areas in the city, I still think has some value if you still would like to see it done. And I guess one of the issues is the bus commitment's still there.
I think before, wasn't it about the leaf changing?
Excuse me?
The fall foliage?
It was a fall foliage event, right,
So
right. And I was asked this year
is
to
a
try to tie it into
heritage.
Arbor Week period sometime. Trying to, the question
I'm just
this year
trying to
was, could we tie
understand
it?
how this ties to the Natural Resources Committee, if it's a heritage tour.
Well, to me, the heritage aspect was the natural resource heritage, not just cultural heritage. We did cover a little cultural heritage just for interest's sake, but the real thing we covered was sites, development examples that you folks have overseen. We looked at the Cove. That was a stopping point. We don't have to do that again, but there was about 14 sites we looked at, and I don't have that outline in front of me. And again, the river tour is different than that, the bus tour. But my thinking would be, if we're going to do it and try to keep it within the window of the Arbor Week celebration, because that'd be a good advertising ploy, frankly. We could do it in the spring. We could also wait until the fall. It's up to you. The two don't have to run concurrently, although I think it is nice to do something like this during Arbor Week. But now we got to come up with a date, and I'll be honest with you, I don't have any way to do this earlier than that because of Arbor Week commitments I have with Gladstone. But anyway, we can still think about it if you like until next meeting.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
And bring a better outline for you of what it might look like. I guess the question would be, do you think the commitment would be there still from the city for the bus? That's an important issue.
Yeah, I'd like to see what the proposal is.
Okay, we could also assess people $5 a head, and cover that pretty quickly. I mean, $10 a head would more than cover it.
All right, another item, or is that it?
That's it.
Okay.
I'm done.
All right.
Doug has something.
I have a couple of things real quick
Good
here.
deal.
One of them is just to report back to you. I'd taken on the responsibility for getting a project going to develop an urban streams stewardship brochure, and I've worked with Pete a bit and gotten some recommendations for contacts to make in other entities, including other departments in Oregon City and in Clackamas County and Metro and Clackamas Community College. But the concept basically is for us to partner with the Greater Oregon City Watershed Council, as you recall, to lead this project and then pull others in who are interested to work with us. So I'm working on assembling that team now. Catherine Costo's working with me, representing the Watershed Council, and we're starting to assemble materials and the like. So we're just starting to get going, and I'll report back to you each month on where we are in our progress and any opportunities for those of you to get involved who wish to. So that one is starting to move. And then secondly, I brought along with me the new edition of the naturescaping brochure that Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife develops for how to manage urban habitat on your own property. Very well done, actually, supported by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Foundation nationally, using funds through the Wallop-Bro program and Sport Fish Restoration program, somewhat in the same way that the Marine Board gets money for boat ramps and other good things like that, actually. So any of you that want this, I've got enough, I think, for everybody here, if you'd like one.
All right,
Let me
thank
just
you. Wow.
pass them out here, and there's one for you too, Pete, if you'd like.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Wow, that's pretty beautiful.
Great.
Mr. Neal.
April 17th, is that the city cleanup day?
Well, April 13th is Arbor Day. City cleanup, I'm not sure.
We'll have to get back. I don't know off the top of my head what the date
No, I
Cleanup
don't know
is the
what
16th.
Nancy's organizing this year.
It's that Saturday, right around the
Saturday's right around there.
The Greater Oregon City Watershed Council will be doing about every other year, getting back into the what's called the Abernathy Creek Park, which is where John Adams Street dead ends if you come off from the old auction building, and dealing with invasive species there. So we'll be keeping on top of that.
Where's that at again?
Abernathy Creek Park.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay, right by the vets there.
Yes, right behind the vets.
The 18th of April is a Saturday.
So that must be it, then, I
Yeah,
guess.
I think that may be the date.
The thing is, it's close to Arbor Day, and I don't know if anything can be piggybacked from the Arbor Day event to the cleanup event, even if it's just educational to the people that are coming to the Arbor Day event.
We'll see what can be done. We can always link websites and that sort of thing, yeah.
I was thinking of also letting people know that we're coming to it, where there might be some sites they can work on.
Some side work, yeah. I'll talk to Nancy Bush and see what we can coordinate with them, since she's our coordinator for that, yeah.
Wonderful, that's it.
It's a beautiful document, thank you. Wow.
Okay, future agenda items, do we need to?
I was just going to add a couple things real quick.
go ahead, Tom.
The Community Development Department is looking at potentially taking over the facilitation of the Citizen Involvement Committee, trying to return that focus to land use, participation in education, and focusing on neighborhood livability issues, providing a little bit of assistance with them. But I think that does offer an opportunity for, as we've talked about here, with stewardship opportunities, to provide programs from the Natural Resource Committee that we can directly take to the CIC and the neighborhood associations, and so maybe start thinking about pruning, good, just what are things that we can bring from Natural Resource Committee that we could then put out into our neighborhood associations as it relates to protecting the resources that we have in the city?
Everything from helping them understand code to invasive species to,
Yeah, so like if we're coming up, the brochures for streamwater protect, there are parts of that go to all the way up to what you're dumping out into the street, how you're using detergents, washing your car, and getting into the storm system. So maybe there's a program that we can be created that we can then take out to the neighborhood associations. And so just thinking about those opportunities to overlap some of these committees and the work that's being done.
I know Brian is very good at instructing. I know you were what you do with my youth. I mean, this document you just provided us has water gardens, about 8 different designs of simple gardens. I mean, that's the kind of thing that somebody could come to the CIC and present as an example. You take this back to your neighborhood. That's something we could do. You could do that really well. I just volunteered.
How can we get the message out there and try to engage more folks and get them interested? One of the goals is to increase the participation rate at the neighborhood association. Second issue, obviously, many of you are aware, Carnegie Library's been moving forward. They have submitted their land use application, so we're in the process of reviewing that here, moving forward with that. We've been in negotiations with the Cove developers. They brought in another private developer, Grand Cove out of Colorado. They're looking at they've taken down the old glacier site, and so we're negotiating with them for a revised development agreement as well as the necessary land use amendments that would be necessary to move that forward.
Will that be a separate project then from the Cove?
Or we're trying to figure out the best way to process that right now. They're so intertwined because of the balance cut and fill requirements. It's hard to break them apart. The Riverwalk, we're moving forward with that. I'm sure many of you, I think I updated you last time, the governor did sign off on our financing plan. We were able to receive donations of the public easement across George's Hygeriken's property as well as Portland General Electric. George Hygeriken also agreed to up to $900,000 for design and engineering of the Riverwalk, as well as 20% of the operating and maintenance costs of that Riverwalk once it's constructed. We released an RFP for the design and construction of the Riverwalk about 2 weeks ago. We hope to have that selection process completed around May, mid-May, and then start that public engagement and design process right after that, with a goal of constructing what would at this point be a phase 1, because we've identified about $12 to $13 million right now. We need about 35. With hopefully, if everything went well, we could start construction on a phase 1 probably in the summer of 16.
Summer when?
Summer of 16.
And would I hear you say that you have 12 to 15 million already committed?
About 12 to 13.
And that's state or federal, or what is that?
It's state, metro, and local.
Okay. Good. Very good.
Okay.
Wow.
Pete, any last things?
No, I'll report back at the next meeting. So.
Well, thank you for the tree code presentation. It was
Sure.
very informative.
Thanks.
Just want to make sure you didn't need us to do anything particular. All right.
Before we adjourn, I want to thank Pete also for setting this Skype up. It did work, it sounds like, didn't it? Or not
Well,
Skype,
not
the audio
video,
part,
but
audio part.
the audio, yeah.
Yeah, that was pretty neat to have that done.
Sorry I'm a little premature. I forgot to ask Richard if he had anything you wanted to add. His member report?
Actually, I do have one thing I wanted to mention. Pete, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
He went home.
Look, would it be possible to ask Chris Dunlop over in the GIS section to maybe have a little presentation sometime?
Yeah,
To show
sure.
the,
I'll ask him.
Natural resource overlays and how he can manipulate things.
Yeah, they've made a lot of changes to the OC Web Maps tool
Yeah.
in the last few months, so he'd probably want to be happy to give you a
Yeah, thanks for
update
sending
if he
that
can
link
get
to
the
us.
time. I'll ask him.
Yeah. That was a nice link.
Yeah, I think it'd really be valuable for the NRC to to see what you have and to see how it can be manipulated to maybe answer questions for various
Sure.
people at various times.
Yeah, good point. Okay. Is that a future addenda? That's potential future addenda item?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you, Richard. All right, with that
You're
said,
welcome.
we're going to adjourn the meeting.
Good job.